Officer Daniel Reeves had survived shootouts, high-speed chases, and nights that most people wouldn't live through once. But the scariest moment of his life wasn't caused by a criminal. It came from inside his own chest. And the only reason he's still alive today is because of a dog. This is the true story of a police officer who was brought to the edge of death, not by a suspect, but by a heart attack while on duty, and how his loyal K9 partner didn't just notice something was wrong, he saved his life. What this dog did next, you won't believe it until you hear it. Officer Daniel Reeves had always been the kind of man who believed in control. Control over his mind, control over his body, control over every dangerous situation he stepped into. And in 16 years of police work, that mindset had served him well. There wasn't much Daniel hadn't seen. He tackled armed suspects in alleyways, negotiated tense standoffs where one wrong word could have cost lives, and once even dove into a frozen river to save a teenager who'd fallen through the ice. But ask him what his proudest moment was. He wouldn't name any of those cases. He'd tell you it was the day he was assigned Thor. Thor, a 2-year-old Belgian Malinois with fire in his eyes and a heart full of loyalty, wasn't easy to handle. Not at first. K9 officers always say the first few weeks with a new dog are like dating someone with a rocket launcher. Beautiful, powerful, but if you make one wrong move, everything blows up. Thor had attitude. In training, he'd stare down instructors, snarl at fellow K9s, even ignore commands just to test limits. But Daniel, he didn't flinch. You don't break a dog like that, he told his lieutenant once. You earn him. So that's what he did. Every day after shift, Daniel stayed late, working with Thor, repeating commands, rewarding the tiniest moments of trust. Sometimes they'd just sit in the empty field behind the station, Thor resting his head on Daniel's boot, both of them silent, just watching the sky. Weeks passed, then months, and something incredible happened. Thor started to change. He began to follow Daniel with laser focus, at first during training, then during patrols, then everywhere. If Daniel walked into a room, Thor was a shadow behind him. If Daniel opened the cruiser door, Thor leapt in before it even shut. They became more than partners. They were bonded. Colleagues noticed it too. That dog looks at you like you're his whole world, one officer told Daniel. Daniel didn't say much in response, but he knew it was true. By year 2 of their partnership, they were a legend in the department, the Ghost and the Guardian, some of the rookies called them. Daniel was quiet, methodical, rarely spoke unless necessary. Thor, fast, fierce, relentless. Together, they had over 70 arrests. They tracked down fugitives, sniffed out hidden weapons, and once even located a missing child deep in a wooded park after midnight. Thor had found the boy by his sock, buried in the leaves. Every day felt like a mission, but it never felt like work. To Daniel, the job wasn't just about fighting crime. It was about order, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, keeping chaos at bay. But the irony, the chaos he couldn't predict, the one threat he wasn't trained to face, was building inside him the whole time. Daniel had always taken pride in being the strong one, the reliable one, the guy who never missed a beat, never called in sick, and never complained, even when the job got ugly, especially then. But over the past few months, something had started to feel off. It wasn't obvious at first, just little things. A slight tightness in his chest after chasing a suspect, a weird flutter in his heartbeat when he climbed stairs too fast, a dizzy spell that made him lean on the side of the cruiser one afternoon, while Thor stared at him, ears perked, like he knew something was wrong. Daniel brushed it off. Stress, he told himself. Too much caffeine. Getting older. He was 42 now. No spring chicken, sure, but still in better shape than half the rookies. He worked out 3 times a week, ate clean, didn't smoke, rarely drank. If anyone had the right to think they were invincible, it was him. But Thor had started acting differently. He'd become more protective, not just during calls, but at the station too. If another officer came too close to Daniel's desk, Thor would put himself between them. Subtle, not aggressive, but watchful, like a silent sentinel. Daniel noticed it. Everyone did. Your dog's acting weird lately, his partner Rick mentioned one day. Maybe he's just getting old, Daniel said with a small shrug. But deep down, he wasn't so sure. There was that one morning, about a week before everything fell apart, when Daniel had woken up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, not a nightmare, no dreams at all, just a sharp, gnawing pain in his left shoulder that vanished after a few minutes. He didn't tell anyone. What was he supposed to say? That his shoulder hurt for 10 minutes and then didn't? He was a cop. They were used to pain, used to pushing through. But Thor didn't forget. The next day, when Daniel grabbed the cruiser keys from the rack, Thor refused to jump in. He stood next to the car, staring up at Daniel, whining low in his throat like he was trying to say, "Not today." It took a full minute of coaxing before Thor finally got inside, and even then, he sat differently. Usually, Thor faced the window, scanning everything like a soldier on patrol. But that day, he sat facing Daniel the whole time, quiet, eyes locked, like he was watching him instead of the streets. Daniel laughed it off. "What's with you today, huh?" he said aloud. "You going soft on me?" But deep down, the laughter felt hollow. That week was strange, almost heavy. Calls were quiet. The city had settled into a weird calm, but Daniel felt anything but peaceful. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Not out there, in here. His chest felt tight more often. Not painful, just squeezed, like someone was slowly turning a wrench inside his ribs. One night, he sat on the edge of his bed with his shirt off, looking in the mirror. He didn't see anything wrong, but he felt it. Thor patted over and rested his chin on Daniel's leg, and that moment, that tiny, silent moment, felt like a warning. Still, Daniel went to work the next morning. Business as usual. He and Thor were assigned a routine patrol, just a sweep through the industrial district. Nothing major. A few empty warehouses, a couple abandoned lots where graffiti artists like to hang out, maybe chase off a loiterer or two. It was cold that morning, not freezing, but sharp enough to sting the skin. Daniel took a long sip of his black coffee, sighed, and rubbed his chest for the third time that morning. "You and me," he muttered to Thor. "Let's knock this out and get back before lunch." Thor tilted his head but said nothing. They pulled into the gravel lot next to an old textile mill that had been shut down for years. Graffiti everywhere, beer bottles, the usual. Daniel stepped out of the car, hand resting on his sidearm, eyes scanning the surroundings. Thor stayed in the cruiser, watching. The air was still, no movement. Daniel walked along the side of the building, gravel crunching under his boots. That's when it started. At first, he thought it was just indigestion, a burning pressure in the center of his chest, right behind the breastbone, dull but deep. He paused, placed his hand on the nearest wall to steady himself, breathed in, sharp pain. Then the burning spread into his left shoulder, then down his arm. His knees buckled. He staggered forward, then dropped to one knee, heart hammering, head swimming. The edges of his vision began to blur, and as he crumpled fully to the ground, one final thought echoed in his mind. Not fear, not regret, just one name. Thor. Thor heard it first. That sound, a thud, quick and heavy, followed by the faint scrape of boots on gravel. Then nothing. For a second, there was stillness. Then the whimper, a sound so quiet, so weak, it barely registered through the cruiser's glass. But Thor heard it, and that was all it took. In a split second, the calm was gone. Thor exploded into action, slamming his body against the car door, pawing at the handle, barking wildly. The kind of bark that didn't mean, "Look at that stray cat," or "Someone's walking by." This was different. This bark meant danger, urgency. Now, inside the cruiser, the door locks had been left engaged, standard safety during patrols. But Thor didn't care. He barked harder, clawed faster, and when the lock didn't budge, he did something he'd only ever done in training once. He launched himself through the half-open passenger window. The moment his paws hit the ground, he ran, full speed. No hesitation. He didn't need to sniff. He didn't need to search. He knew where Daniel was, because Thor had felt it long before the collapse. The change in his partner's breathing, the strain in his scent, the off-rhythm of the heartbeat he'd learned to recognize just by resting his head against Daniel's chest so many nights. He turned the corner of the warehouse and stopped dead in his tracks. There he was, Daniel, collapsed on his side, one arm tucked beneath him, the other limp in the gravel, face pale, mouth slightly open, eyes barely open. He was gasping, not breathing, gasping. Thor bolted forward and let out a howl so loud it echoed off the warehouse walls like a war cry. But there was no one around, no partner to radio in, no civilians passing by, just an empty district and the soft wheezing of a man whose heart was giving out, and a dog who refused to leave him. Thor circled Daniel once, sniffing his face, his hands, nudging him gently. Nothing, no response. Daniel blinked, just once, a faint flicker, but his body didn't move. Thor sat beside him. He looked left, he looked right. There was no help coming. He whined, once, twice. Then he did something Daniel had taught him years ago, a move meant for emergency situations, never used in real life. He bolted back toward the cruiser. There was a radio inside, and more importantly, there were people on the other end. Thor jumped into the front seat, claws sliding across the plastic. His nose hit the dash. Then again, and again, until click, the emergency horn button. Honk! A single, sharp blast echoed across the alley, but no one responded, so he did it again. Honk! Honk! Then silence, then barking, so loud, so frantic, it pierced through the morning air like sirens. At the station, Officer Rick Sanders had just finished his coffee when a call came over the radio. A citizen had reported a cruiser with its horn blaring and a dog inside going crazy near the old textile mill. Rick froze. He knew who had that route. Unit 9 to 14, he radioed. Reeves, you there? No response. Unit 9 to 14, come in. Still silence. Then came a noise over the channel, barely audible. Heavy breathing, a faint, distorted bark in the background. That was all Rick needed. He grabbed his gear and hit the lights. Back at the warehouse, Thor was running between the cruiser and Daniel. He never left him for long, just enough to bark, to try to flag someone down, then sprint back. He licked Daniel's face. He pawed at his vest. He even lay across Daniel's chest at one point, as if trying to warm him, to keep his heartbeat going just a few moments longer. Daniel was slipping. He could feel it, but Thor refused to let go. And somewhere, in the blurry haze of fading consciousness, Daniel felt something heavy on his chest. Not pain, not pressure, warmth, weight, a familiar scent, and then a bark, loud and sharp in his ear. He wasn't alone. The sirens broke the silence like thunder. Red and blue lights flashed down the alleyway, cutting through the morning haze. Officer Rick Sanders slammed the brakes and jumped out before the cruiser even stopped moving. What he saw made him stop cold. There, just 20 yards ahead, was Daniel, lying flat on his back in the gravel, eyes barely open, lips tinged blue, and right on top of him was Thor, not pacing, not barking, just lying across Daniel's chest, ears pinned back, face low, body completely still except for the rise and fall of his own rapid breathing. Rick shouted, "Daniel!" No response. He rushed forward, but the second he came close, Thor growled, low and deep in his throat. Not vicious, not violent, just protective. Warning, he's mine. Don't you dare hurt him. Rick stopped. Easy, boy. It's okay, he said gently, lowering his voice. Let me help him. Thor looked down at Daniel, then back at Rick. His growl faded. Rick knelt down and placed 2 fingers on Daniel's neck. Faint pulse. Barely there. He grabbed the radio clip to his chest. This is Unit 7 to 3. I need medical backup. Officer down. Repeat. Officer down. Possible cardiac arrest. Location. Alley behind the old textile mill. We need paramedics now. As he spoke, he noticed something strange. Thor wasn't moving off Daniel. In fact, the dog's position, lying across Daniel's chest, wasn't random. It was intentional, purposeful. It was like he was applying pressure, keeping weight on Daniel's chest. Almost like, holy crap, Rick whispered. He's trying to do CPR. Not the kind you see in training videos. Not perfect chest compressions, but still his body weight, his rhythm, his positioning. Thor was trying to keep Daniel breathing, trying to stimulate his heart, doing the only thing he could think to do, and it might have been working. Daniel took a shallow breath, then another. Rick's voice cracked over the radio. He's still breathing, barely. He's got his K9 laying on top of him, like it's holding him together. Dispatch, paramedics en route. 5 minutes out. 5 minutes. It might as well have been an eternity. Rick looked down at Thor. You hang in there, buddy, he whispered. Keep doing what you're doing. Those next few minutes were a blur. Thor never moved. Not even when the ambulance arrived. Not even when paramedics pulled out the defibrillator. He growled when they first reached for Daniel, but Rick stepped in, kneeling beside him and placing a hand on his collar. It's okay, Thor. Let them help. Thor hesitated, then backed away. Only a foot, just enough to let them work. But his eyes never left Daniel. Not once. They shocked him twice. Chest jolting, arms twitching, flatline. Then, miraculously, rhythm, faint but steady. They loaded Daniel onto a stretcher, hooked up oxygen, started fluids, called the hospital with a code blue. And the whole time, Thor followed, refused to be left behind. One paramedic tried to close the ambulance door, but Thor leaped up, landing with a heavy thud beside Daniel's stretcher, eyes locked on his partner. Let him ride, the paramedic said. I've never seen anything like this. At the hospital, Daniel was rushed into emergency surgery. A blocked artery, a major one. His heart had nearly stopped for good. The doctor said if it had been even 3 minutes longer, he wouldn't have made it. 3 minutes. That's how close it came. And it was Thor who made the difference. The barking, the horn, the refusal to leave his side, even the weight on Daniel's chest. It had bought him time, just enough. While Daniel was in surgery, Thor waited in the hospital corridor, sitting, standing, pacing, sitting again. Every time a nurse walked by, he looked up, hoping, expecting. Hours passed. Then, finally, Rick stepped into the hallway. He crouched next to Thor and scratched behind his ears. "He made it," he said softly. "Your partner pulled through." Thor didn't wag his tail, didn't bark. He just rested his head against Rick's chest. Quiet, exhausted, but calm, because the job was done. Daniel opened his eyes 3 days later. The room was quiet, lit by the soft buzz of fluorescent lights. A steady beeping echoed beside him, the sound of life, still present, still beating. At first, he was disoriented, tubes in his arms, oxygen in his nose. He blinked slowly, turning his head toward the window, and that's when he saw him, Thor, lying curled up in the corner of the room, head resting on his paws, eyes half shut, but not asleep. The moment Daniel stirred, Thor was up, tail wagging, ears forward, those eyes so focused, so intense, locked straight on Daniel's face. The heart monitor spiked. Daniel smiled weakly. "Hey, buddy." His voice was barely more than a whisper, but it didn't matter. Thor patted over, gently placed his head on Daniel's chest, careful not to touch the wires, and closed his eyes. Daniel reached up and placed a trembling hand on Thor's neck. That one touch said everything. They were back. Rick came by later that afternoon. He leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, smiling at the sight of the man and dog who had become the heartbeat of their entire precinct. "Hell of a scene you two caused," he said. Daniel chuckled softly, though it turned into a cough. "Guess I missed the excitement." Rick stepped inside. "You didn't just have a heart attack. You flatlined, man. Twice. Paramedics said if it weren't for your mutt here, we'd be burying you right now." Daniel looked at Thor, who had now curled up beside the bed. "He saved me," Daniel said. Rick nodded. "Yeah, he did. And not just by barking. He got your radio, sounded the horn, led us straight to you. And get this. They say the pressure he kept on your chest might have helped stimulate your heart, just enough to keep it from giving out." Daniel's face softened. "He's always had my back." Rick's voice dropped. "That dog didn't just save your life. He refused to let you go." News of Thor's heroic actions spread like wildfire. By the end of the week, local reporters were camped outside the hospital. Words like "miracle dog," "canine hero," and "guardian angel on 4 legs" started appearing in headlines. Footage of Thor barking in the cruiser was pulled from body cam audio. The dispatch recordings leaked. Even the hospital released a statement praising the K9 for his actions. Thor didn't care. He didn't understand viral videos, or interviews, or awards. All he cared about was being close to Daniel. And Daniel, he couldn't stop thinking about that moment in the alley. The darkness closing in, the sense that he was leaving, and then that bark, that sharp, jarring bark that pulled him back just enough to hold on. 3 weeks later, Daniel was cleared to return home. He wasn't ready for full duty. His heart needed time, but the doctors were amazed by his recovery. They usually don't bounce back this fast. One cardiologist told him, "Your vitals are strong. Honestly, you're lucky to be alive." Daniel looked down at Thor, who was lying across his feet in the hospital room. "I wasn't lucky," he said. "I had Thor. At home, things moved slowly. Daniel had to adjust. Daily meds, low sodium meals, cardiac rehab. But Thor adapted without question. Every morning, Thor waited patiently while Daniel checked his heart rate. During walks, he slowed his pace to match Daniel's. At night, he slept beside Daniel's bed, not on the couch where he used to nap, but directly beside him, close enough that his breathing matched Daniel's. That first week, Daniel woke up in the middle of the night from a nightmare, sweating, gasping, heart racing. Thor was already there, head on his chest, watching him, grounding him. Soon, the department planned a ceremony, something to honor Thor, a medal, a plaque, a formal recognition of his service. But when the day came, Daniel insisted on saying something personal. He stood at the podium, one hand resting on Thor's collar, voice trembling slightly. "You all know Thor as a working dog," he began. "You know he can chase down suspects, sniff out drugs, alert on explosives. But what he did that day in the alley, that wasn't training." He paused, looking down at Thor. "That was loyalty, instinct, love. He didn't just react. He chose to save me. And I'm standing here today because he did." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even the captain, a grizzled 30-year vet, cleared his throat a few too many times during applause. After the ceremony, things began to change. Not just for Daniel, but for everyone in the department. Thor wasn't just a K9 anymore. He had become something more. A symbol, A reminder that the job wasn't just about badges and reports and arrests. It was about heart, about sacrifice, about the quiet kind of loyalty that shows itself when no one else is watching. And for Daniel, the recovery journey became something deeper. He wasn't just healing his body, he was rethinking everything. For 16 years, he had poured his life into the force. Long hours, sleepless nights, missed birthdays, missed dinners. He always told himself it was worth it, and maybe it was. But lying in that hospital bed, feeling the echo of his heart faltering, he realized something. The only constant in his life, the one who never judged, never walked away, never gave up on him, was Thor. Not the commendations, not the promotions, just Thor. And Daniel started making changes. He asked for lighter duty, not because he was weaker, but because he didn't want to take the moments for granted anymore. He made time for real rest, started showing up to family dinners again, started calling his sister, his mom, his old army buddy, who he hadn't spoken to in years. But the biggest change? He started journaling every day, sometimes just a sentence, sometimes a paragraph, and every entry began the same way. Today, Thor reminded me, the world didn't forget either. Within a month of the incident, Thor had been featured on national news. A major TV station flew in for an interview. Animal rescue organizations reached out, wanting to sponsor him. And then, an unexpected envelope arrived in the mail. It was from a 9-year-old boy named Caleb in Iowa. Inside was a hand-drawn picture of a police dog wearing a cape and a short note in crayon. Dear Thor, you are my hero. When I grow up, I want to be a dog like you. Love, Caleb. Daniel stared at the letter for a long time. It hit harder than all the articles, the medals, the applause. This was the impact. This was the real legacy. One night, about 2 months after the heart attack, Daniel and Thor were sitting on the back porch. It was quiet, cool breeze, crickets singing in the grass. Daniel was sipping tea, Thor curled up by his feet, eyes half closed. Out of nowhere, Daniel spoke. You know, I think I was ready to go that day. Thor looked up, ears twitching. I mean it, Daniel said. I didn't feel fear. I felt peace, like maybe it was my time. He paused, but you wouldn't let me. Thor sat up straighter. Daniel smiled, leaning forward to scratch behind his ears. You brought me back. You barked. You cried. You laid on my chest like your weight alone could hold me together. His voice cracked just a bit. I didn't ask you to do that, but you did. Thor nudged Daniel's hand, then rested his head on his lap. Daniel let out a soft laugh, brushing a tear from his cheek. You stubborn mutt, he whispered. I owe you my life. That night, Daniel wrote a journal entry that he would never forget. Today, Thor reminded me that love doesn't need words. It just shows up when you're broken, when you're alone, when you're slipping away. And sometimes, it shows up with a bark, a paw, and a heart stronger than yours. Word continued to spread. A retired officer from New York reached out, saying the story helped him finally process the PTSD he'd carried for years. A single mom messaged Daniel after seeing the story online, telling him her son, who was terrified of dogs, now wanted to visit the local shelter and adopt one. Thor had started a ripple, a quiet one, but deep. And Daniel, he felt something change inside. Purpose. Not the kind that comes from a paycheck or a badge. The kind that comes from knowing you were part of something that mattered. He started giving talks at the academy, sharing not just tactics or procedures, but heart, telling the new recruits about what it really means to have a partner who would die for you or live for you. Then came the moment that would lead into the climax. It was a cool autumn morning. Daniel had just returned from a follow-up appointment. The doctor had good news. His heart was healing well. He could start light jogging again. Maybe even think about going back to full patrol duty in a few months. He was walking back to the cruiser when he noticed something. Thor wasn't following. He turned. Thor was sitting on the pavement, a few feet back, staring at him, ears back, tail still, and that look in his eyes. Something was wrong. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He had seen Thor in many situations, during chases, gunfire, intense searches, but this was different. Thor's body was still, but his eyes were wide, and there was something unsettling about the way he sat there, almost as though he were waiting, watching. Thor, Daniel called, taking a step toward him, but Thor didn't move. Instead, he glanced at Daniel, then at something in the distance, then back at him. Daniel froze. His training kicked in. Something was wrong. He instinctively reached for his radio. His fingers brushed the button, but before he could press it, Thor stood up, ears forward now, his body taut like a bowstring. Then it happened. The pain hit, a sudden, sharp, and overwhelming pressure in his chest. A familiar sensation, the same pain that had nearly ended his life 2 months ago. Daniel gasped, clutching his chest. He staggered backward, his knees nearly giving way. It was the heart attack again, but this time it was different. This time he was aware. This time he didn't have the luxury of feeling peaceful. This time he was terrified. He collapsed to the ground, trying to breathe but failing, the sharp pain making it almost impossible to think. Thor, he couldn't even call out to him. His vision blurred. His limbs were heavy. The ground felt colder than it ever had before. But Thor, he was already there. Before Daniel could even register what was happening, Thor was on top of him, his body low to the ground, gently nudging Daniel's chest with his nose. His ears were back, and for the first time, Daniel could see the concern in his eyes. Real concern. Daniel tried to speak, to tell him to go get help, but the words wouldn't come. His breathing was shallow, erratic. His heart pounded in his ears, and the world seemed to close in. But Thor didn't leave. Instead, he pressed his body against Daniel's, as if trying to hold him together. He stayed there, unmoving, feeling every labored breath Daniel took. With each moment, Daniel felt his strength slipping further away. This was it. He was going to die. But Thor wouldn't let him go. In the moments that followed, the bond between man and dog became more than just a partnership. It became something elemental. Thor's body was the only thing between Daniel and the abyss. His paws moved over Daniel's chest, pressing down, gently but firmly. It wasn't just a comforting touch, it was a lifeline. And for Daniel, who had already been through the worst once, he knew now that Thor wasn't going to let him slip away again. His breathing became more erratic, his chest rising and falling faster. But still, Thor stayed. Daniel's vision blurred. His thoughts felt disconnected, but somewhere in the haze, he could hear Thor's breathing, steady and sure. He's here, Daniel thought. Just stay with me. The moment seemed to stretch on forever. Minutes later, though it felt like an eternity, the sound of sirens pierced the air. But it wasn't the paramedics who arrived first. It was Rick, racing toward Daniel's fallen form, eyes wide with panic. No, Daniel. But before Rick could even kneel down beside him, Thor stood up, facing him, blocking his way. His eyes were fixed on Rick, and the low growl that rumbled from Thor's chest made it clear that no one was getting past him, not without Daniel's permission. Rick froze, confused for just a second, until he understood. "Damn it, Thor," Rick muttered. And with that, Rick knew what he had to do. He called for backup, but he didn't move toward Daniel. Thor was the only one Daniel needed right now. The ambulance arrived moments later, but even they hesitated. They could see it in Thor's eyes. This wasn't just any K9. This was his partner. The paramedics worked quickly, but it wasn't until they had Daniel on the stretcher and Thor reluctantly moved aside that they were able to get him into the ambulance. Thor paced back and forth, his eyes never leaving the vehicle, his ears trained on every sound inside. He refused to be left behind. At the hospital, Daniel was rushed straight to the ER, where doctors immediately got to work stabilizing him. His heart had stopped again, but this time, it hadn't been for long. They managed to get a steady rhythm back, but it was clear that Daniel wasn't out of the woods yet. For hours, Thor waited outside the ER. The next day, Daniel woke up to the sight of Thor's face beside his bed once again. This time, it wasn't just a quiet vigil. Thor was there, wagging his tail ever so slightly, ears perked as he waited for his partner to return to him. Daniel looked at him, groggy but still aware. "You did it again, didn't you, buddy?" he whispered. Thor licked his hand gently. "You saved me." The days that followed were a blur. The hospital stay, the follow-up appointments, the well wishes from colleagues and friends. It all felt surreal, but the one thing that remained constant through it all, the one thing Daniel couldn't ignore, was Thor. Thor never left his side. While Daniel healed, Thor became his rock. The bond between them, already unshakable, was now stronger than ever. It was as if, in saving Daniel's life not once, but twice, Thor had forged an unspoken promise. "I will always be there for you, no matter what." And Daniel, he understood that promise more deeply than ever before. He learned that life wasn't just about fighting crime, chasing down suspects, or wearing a badge. It wasn't about the adrenaline or the high-speed chases. Life was about the ones who stayed with you when things got tough, the ones who stood by you when no one else could. And sometimes, those ones came on four legs, with a heart just as big as any human's. A week after Daniel was released from the hospital, the police department held a small gathering in the break room. It was a simple, no-frills event, just the department, some pizza, and a few speeches. But to Daniel, it was everything. He stood up, the room growing quiet as all eyes turned to him. First off, "I want to thank each and every one of you for your support," Daniel began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It hasn't been easy, but I'm here and I'm alive, and that's thanks to a lot of things. Good doctors, great friends, but most of all to this guy." He turned to Thor, who was sitting at his feet, ears perked and tail wagging ever so slightly. Thor looked up at Daniel, and for a brief moment, it felt like they were the only two people in the room. Daniel bent down and placed a hand on Thor's head. "I owe him everything," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I'd seen it all in this job, but nothing prepared me for what Thor did. He didn't hesitate. He didn't think twice. He saved my life, and I'll spend every day for the rest of my life trying to show him just how much that means to me." Thor nuzzled Daniel's hand, as if understanding every word. The room filled with applause, but Daniel didn't need the recognition. He didn't need the applause. He only needed Thor, standing by his side. As the weeks passed, Daniel returned to patrol duty, but it was different now. He no longer felt like the same officer who had once faced danger without a second thought. Now, he understood that there was more to this job than just catching criminals. It was about being there for each other. It was about sacrifice and loyalty, and he had learned that lesson the hard way. And Thor? Well, Thor was right there with him. Every patrol, every shift, every call. Their partnership was a reminder to everyone they encountered that loyalty goes beyond words. It goes beyond even what we think is possible. And as for Daniel, he never took a single moment for granted again. Daniel and Thor's story is a reminder of the unbreakable bond that can exist between humans and animals, and the power of loyalty in the face of the greatest challenges. If you believe in the power of true friendship, whether it's between a man and his dog or between any two beings, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Stay tuned for more incredible stories of courage, sacrifice, and the animals who change our lives forever.